Hi, I'm Dave Arnold, and you're listening to Ingredient Insiders.
This is Ingredient Insiders. I'm John Magazzino.
And I'm Andrea Parkins.
On each episode of Ingredient Insiders, we'll be talking with chefs and food writers about their favorite ingredients.
And then we talk to the producer of that ingredient to learn its history, how it's made, and why chefs love to use it in their restaurants.
Andrea, today we have Dave Arnold coming on. He's got a new bar in New York City called Bar Contra. This guy is a genius.
Mad scientist of the bar cocktail world.
I have no idea what ingredient we're going to talk about with him.
Nope, we have not been able to nail that down with him.
But I can tell you that we're going to have a very interesting discussion. I can just feel it in my gut.
Yeah.
He is, I think of him as like, you know, exactly what you said, kind of a mad scientist. He reminds me a lot of Doc Brown from Back to the Future.
100%.
He can build these crazy things.
He has a whole line of cocktail machines and equipment that he has made just for that. He's really into carbonation.
Yep.
In a way that probably people don't even think about. He created the centrifuge where he is extracting flavors from different fruits and creating syrups. And I think a lot of people look to him for inspiration, for innovation in the bar and cocktail world.
Yeah, he really is this incredible scientist. I wonder if he can build like a time travel machine for us.
I mean, I hope he walks in with one.
Well, I am really looking forward to it. It's Dave Arnold from Bar Contra.
Innovation with Dave Arnold. This season of Ingredient Insiders is brought to you by Bazzini Nuts and Dried Fruits. Picture this. Plump, juicy dried fruits bursting with natural sweetness, perfectly complemented by the rich, nutty crunch of Bazzini's premium nuts. From almonds to pistachios and everything in between, each batch is meticulously sourced and expertly crafted to ensure unparalleled quality and flavor. Whether you're whipping up a gourmet salad, creating a show-stopping dessert, or crafting a savory masterpiece, Bazzini Nuts and Dried Fruit add the extra layer of texture and taste that sets your dishes apart. Plus, they're packed with wholesome goodness, making them not only delicious, but also nutritious. So fellow chefs, why settle for anything less than extraordinary? Elevate your creations with Bazzini Nuts and Dried Fruit and let your culinary imagination run wild. Your taste buds, your guests will thank you for it. Exceptional quality, value, and taste, Bazzini Nuts.
This episode is in partnership with the Chef's Warehouse and produced by Gotham Production Studios in New York City. This is going to be a fantastic episode, I hope. Well, Dave, I think it is. Don't put your hands up. We've got Dave Arnold today with us in New York City. Andrea, Dave is... We've only met a few times in person. Dave and I were on a trip to Colombia for a food and wine festival in Bogota.
Bogota, great. Like, you know, if I could choose one season, it would be the season that is Bogota, like perpetual early fall.
Yeah.
High altitude, dry, not a lot of bugs.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
A lot of great fruit. I mean, amazing fruit.
The fruit, it's all about the fruit in Colombia.
Yeah.
That's what this episode should be about, Colombian fruit, because I've been lucky to go there a bunch of times since that first trip where Dave and I were there, and every time I go, I just talk about the fruit. I took my daughter to the fruit market.
What kind of fruits?
Well, first of all the fruits.
Okay.
They probably have like 7 different varieties or more just of a passion fruit.
Yeah. And they all have their own names, like,
exactly.
you know, like...
They're not even passion fruit. They're just grenadilla.
Like, right, you know, yeah.
Maracuya,
yeah. And like some of them are more or less musky, so the maracuya ones are a little longer, a little more musky. They have the more standard kind of passion fruits that we have, but they have more, you know how like... You know how you're like, oh, guava, they're all so different. Passion fruit's the same. They're all so different. Yeah. And so...
different colors, different acidity.
It's like when you go to the Santa Monica farmer's market, the plum guy,
but this is next
Santa Monica. I mean, the berry guy... Look, Harry's Berries and like the date people there. I mean, you're like, nah.
Right.
But
this is like a different level.
But it's just like everything. So it's like papaya actually tastes good in Colombia.
Yeah.
Agreed. Like here, it's not a diaper there.
And the citrus in Colombia is amazing. The mandarins are amazing. Every bit of citrus, even things like dragon fruit and pitaya, things that I almost think are like ornamental in other parts of the world. There they taste good. Guanabana.
Oh my God,
I love guanabana.
Does anyone make a good... Okay, okay, here's the thing. A lot of tropical, so I do a lot of bar work, right? And so I also make and sell centrifuges, and I've been doing clarification for a long time because I like to carbonate cocktails. And so I clarify a lot of things. Tropical fruits are often very difficult to clarify because they end up getting kind of an animal sweaty note once a lot of the kind of pulp is removed. So what's left over. So, I've never made, I'm not saying other people, I'm not saying whoever you are, you haven't made a good one, but I'm saying like I've never been super happy with clarified lychee, for instance. And guanabana is another one of these things where I'm like, when you eat it fresh in Colombia, it's just ridiculous. It's just an absurdly good. You might know it as sour sop is another term for it.
It's like a white, meaty kind of fruit, large black seeds.
Yeah, it looks like it's almost from like the Stone Age. It's got like spiky
outside. Yep.
It's a big green, spiky,
sometimes
intimidating looking. Does it have spikes?
No,
it doesn't have spikes. I'm thinking of another
You're
thing.
thinking of like almost like a durian look.
It looks like the skin.
No, but it's like it looks like a big cherimoya almost.
Yes, I was gonna say it almost looks like the skin of like a dinosaur.
Yes,
or
right. Because
something.
It's smooth with the little lines
it's
around
got all
it.
sorts of stuff going on.
But it's so delicious. But the
so good.
purees never live up.
No,
never.
The purees never. So I like some purees. Like I really like. I like passion fruit puree. I think it's very good. It can be very good.
Yeah.
But yeah, the guanabana, it's like one of those. Lulu also is never the same.
That's another one. I mean, people don't. Have you ever heard of Lulu?
No.
No. Okay, so Lauren went with me. My daughter Sienna. I'm like, you got to have a Lulu with the or Lulata is this drink that they make down there. It's non-alcoholic. It's the juice. They're like, what's a Lulu?
What
it
is
almost looks like a No, it doesn't. It's orangish.
But I don't know. It's used primarily for juice, and it's great.
Incredible.
And it's foamy when they juice it fresh.
You can have a Lulu and gin. You can have just a Lulu juice.
So why don't we think that this has made it here?
Because they can't grow it here. Listen,
but like, why couldn't we import
there's things
it?
they can't do. Our laws for import are like pretty hardcore, and with good reason.
Sure.
You know what I mean? But
I think you can start to bring some of these things in. I actually told my daughter,
get Lulu puree.
Did you bring seeds in your suitcase, John?
My daughter brought a dozen grenadillas, which are the big passion fruits.
Didn't get caught.
Did not get caught.
Amazing.
So the issue, right? With I don't know about those particular, but like for instance with mangoes, as you know, they have to be hot water treated to kill fruit flies, and it wipes them out because they have to, they're picking them maybe when they're still shippable instead of when they're exactly the way you want them, and then they hot water treat them, and then they don't develop anymore. And so I think they're climacteric. Anyway.
This is the tropical fruit episode, by the way. Now, no, but I'm going to cut. We got to cut back because we could talk to Dave literally for 3 to 4 hours, and
easily
not even talked about 1/10 of his life.
No, but tropical fruit's important.
It is important. It is.
This is why if you live here, you got to focus on temperate. That's what they can't do. They can't do fruit that needs a temperature swing.
Right.
Yeah.
So like it's not apple land.
No apples, no pears.
But imagine, we were talking about this before we got on the air in Colombia. Since you're sorry to keep it on for a little bit, but
it's fine.
It's amazing that you choose your temperature based on your altitude, right?
Right.
So, and it's always that temperature all year.
Yeah.
So you can grow these weird things that you can't grow here ever.
And it's amazing that it is a year. And nothing's ever out of season there because I've been there at all different times of the year, and everything is always available? In season. They have a beautiful blackberry called a mora.
Yeah.
The husk cherries there.
Uchuva.
The uchuva.
Which are so much better than the ones you get here.
These you eat and they actually are got a sweet tartness, and they have nothing to do exactly with the ones from New Zealand or wherever they come from.
No, the ones you get here that look the same, they have a bleachy note to them.
Yeah.
And so like if you go to the cool restaurant everyone used to go to when they go to Bogota, is outside of Bogota, Andres Carbonated, and like in a lot of places like this on the table they just have the uchuva in a basket and you're just like pop.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Love it.
Yeah.
We got to go to Colombia to record an episode.
That would be amazing. But I'm going to bring it back a little bit to your background to cocktails. When you're creating cocktails, are you thinking about these ingredients?
Whenever I do an event that is not at home, I try to focus on ingredients that are from where I'm going.
Okay.
So I like to use the techniques, my ideas, my techniques with local ingredients because that's what I like to do, right? So, it's harder as I get older. When I was younger and I had a little more time on the other side of things, I like to show up a day or two early, make sure I have a market day. everyone I know, as soon as they get to a city, they're like, let me see the markets. You know what I mean?
The best part of any visit.
Yeah, and see what the stuff's like, eat a bunch of stuff, and then buy stuff and use that, and you really get a feel for what a place is like. So, like, I'll give you a funny example. So, I do a technique called nitro muddling, where you take liquid nitrogen and you freeze an herb solid, and then you bust it up with a muddler, and you get these very, very fast, very bright infusions with zero oxidation into cocktails, right? So the first one I did was Thai basil, and I've made 8 billion of those, Thai basil daiquiri. And so I was going to do this technique. I was in Greece, in Athens, and so I go to the market, and it turns out nobody buys herbs in the market there because they all just grow their own.
It's wild.
Right.
Yeah, it's wild. And they grow their. I was like, whoa, that's the interesting cultural that I like to learn when you go to a market.
Yeah.
What are they selling here? Like, what's it like? And yeah, sorry to bring it back to Colombia, but the fruits there, oh my God.
I love it. You listen, I was just there, and I've been so many times, and the fruit is one of the biggest draws of being in that country. Spectacular.
Now I want to go.
This is the Colombia episode.
This is like the plug for Colombia.
So I'm jumping way back here. Dave Arnold is somebody who I always think of as almost like the father of like modern cocktails and these like super creative, and like he was just talking about like using liquid nitrogen and centrifuges.
I sell centrifuges. So if you want to buy one, buy one.
And he's got a business called Booker and Dax.
Yeah, Booker and Dax, which was the bar, and now all that remains is the equipment business.
I want to jump way back. Were you like a chemistry major in college or high school? Like, how did you get into
it?
The word of we're going to talk about a lot about cocktails, because I think that's really where the interest in this conversation.
When you say Dave
is.
Arnold, I mean, the first thing that if you Google mad scientist comes up, which I don't think. Do you like that?
I don't care.
Okay. And
I mean,
it's
like,
all
hopefully
about
not
cocktails.
angry, although I get angry at myself, but am I an angry person? Mad meaning, so it's either means you're crazy or you're angry, right? Usually it means crazy.
I think it means you're super creative.
Yeah,
and,
I think mad can be
just,
a good,
I think mad
positive.
science is a good thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's like super creative, super intelligent, and like, but how do you, let's go back to that question about high school. Like, were you a chemistry guy?
In high school, I had, it's funny, no one's ever asked me that. And, the stock answer is yes. When I went to college, I was supposed to be a science person. I thought I was going to do physics, but in fact, my high school chemistry teacher, who, I think she died, 8 years ago, Mrs. Zook, was one of the best teachers I ever had, because teachers, there's like the kind of three kinds: the kinds that hated me, the kinds that tolerated me. I mean, this is for everyone, right? And then like the kinds that love me. But I was, most people, when I say tolerate, like actively had to tolerate me. They couldn't like ignore me because I was always bouncing off the walls, and like, I wouldn't do things, like nowadays you'd be diagnosed. You know what I mean? Like ADHD, spectrum, all the stuff could be diagnosed. But they just didn't do that back then.
Sure.
And
she was just insolent.
Yeah, just like, but she,
Were you the teacher's pet for Miss Zook?
I guess I just loved her class. So, and I went to Horace Greeley, which was, for a public school, extremely fancy public school. Yeah. And so we actually, senior year, I got to do there was an elective in organic chemistry. So I did, I took chemistry with her, and then I took her again for organic chemistry my senior year, and I loved it. And and this was the 80s, right? So we could do all of this stuff. We could even do stuff that was already illegal at the time. Like she was busting out carbon tetrachloride to let us do stuff with nonpolar solvents. And, she was letting us mess with like, elemental metals like calcium and making big hydrogen flames. And like we used to use this stuff called sodium dichromate cleaning solution, which is viciously bad to clean out glasses, to make them analytically clean. So like she'd be like, a glass isn't clean unless when you turn it upside down, the water sheets off of it and nothing remains on the side of the glass. And so we used to fill it with this vicious solution that would just melt everything off the side of the glass, and then empty it out, and then rinse it out with like deionized water. And just like, I loved it. You know what I mean? It's funny. I might actually go back and do some more chemistry work again. But chemistry is a great. it's a great
big
subject.
part of. So where did chemistry and alcohol and beverages intersect for you?
In
like,
college,
when did that
in
happen?
college, John.
in college, I ended up going into philosophy.
Okay.
And then from that, my senior year, I ended up going into art, mainly because I wanted to have something to talk with the person who I was going out with at the time, who I'm married to, have been for, almost 30 years
So
now.
it worked. Okay.
Yeah,
Your
right. Next year's our 30th year.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And so then I went to art grad school, but I always kept my science kind of so when I was working with art, it was, a lot of machines, a lot of science. I'm kind of a gearhead.
Yeah.
And, when I started doing food, I knew I wanted to get into food. I also had a gearhead relationship to that, but also very interested in kind of the history of things. So I've always been weird to pin down. Most people know me as like a gearhead science, but I also started the Museum of Food and Drink not because of my gearhead part of me, but my love of history of food.
Yeah.
So when I met Wiley Dufresne, who's now my brother-in-law, he knew I was a gearhead because I was customizing restaurant equipment. So I lived where you're recording now, which is we're on 39th Street in what I used to call the Garment District. I don't know what they call it now.
Yeah.
They still call it the Garment District?
Yeah, the
I
garment.
think it's still the Garment
I mean, you
District.
still have fabric stores downstairs.
Yeah, there's a couple.
You're in Daytona Trimmings building, not to dox you, but
Yeah.
that's
Right.
that it's been there for a long time. So I lived here when it was still a lot of garment work going on. And I lived in an illegal loft, old school illegal loft with a Fox police lock. Google Fox police locks. They're sick. If you look at old loft video and you see this person who looks like they have a bank vault lock on their door, that was our lock. No one in, no one out. Not a safe neighborhood at the time.
Right.
And also I'm not allowed to live there. So I wasn't allowed to have a kitchen. So I would go to restaurant auctions. I started going to restaurant auctions and buying equipment and then customizing them. So I bought an old garland, and I customized it to have a rotisserie. I bought a deep fat fryer at a place down by World Trade Center and wheeled it in a snowstorm on a cart. At restaurant auctions, it used to be that first of all, they were like the New York Times used to be a print thing with the auctions in it, and you would look. I forget what day of the week it is. They put all of next week's auctions.
Like foreclosure, yeah.
Yeah, and there's 3 or 4 auction houses, and so you would go to the restaurant and you would buy it. And there was all these dealers from the Bowery. They would come up, but if a piece of equipment was too dirty or too effed up, or they already had too many of that, then
no bidding,
and then you got it for basically the auctioneer would beat you into paying something. But if you back in the day, you I want 50 plates, you don't care exactly what they are. It's like every plate is 50 cents because if no one wants it,
right.
It's free, but you have to take it as is, where is that day, or you're toast. So that was always my thing. So I was always trying to getting the garland home. I got my first espresso machine. They shut down a place for drugs, so it had the big DEA thing, and they shut it down. And months later, so when they shut down, I don't know what they do now. When they used to shut something down for DEA, okay, a little bit of backtrack. Back in the 90s. Everyone said that it was impossible to make espresso at home. There were no prosumer machines. There was a small group of people using the Pavoni Europiccolos to do stuff at home, but there was no real prosumer market. And all of the people who knew what they were doing were like, "Man, forget it. You're not going to make good coffee."
Right.
And this is before even Seattle. Seattle was doing its thing, but David Schomer at Vivace wasn't necessarily famous yet. Anyway, so I'm like, I'm going to get an espresso machine. So I go to this auction where they had shut it down. And when they shut it down, they just turned off the electricity and locked the door and padlocked it. And all the food was still in there, festering, and no one wanted to buy anything because it was so you couldn't stand in the space because it stunk so badly of rot and death. So I was like, yes. So I bought this 2-group Rancilio machine from the 80s, semi-auto for $150, something like that. And then, I paid some guy $20 who was buying a hood for something he was doing, and
throw it in the van and help me
get it home. He had turned out to be, and I knew so little about espresso machines at the time because there wasn't a lot of internet stuff on them that I accidentally left the pump. I was like, who needs this water pump? Because I thought the pump was inside the thing. I thought that was just a booster for the, and then so I had to go find him, and he was an interesting guy. I had to go find him way in Brooklyn back in the 90s. Anyway, it's an interesting time. So I was customizing all this restaurant equipment. And Wiley knew that, and so he started getting me into getting things on eBay. So I was one of the very first people buying weird sciencey equipment like circulators on eBay.
Got it.
And, kind of reconditioning them because I could fix anything. And then, he's like, oh, you also know the science stuff. And so it's like weird. Like
you're a mad scientist.
Yeah, it is mad scientist.
You're like the definition of mad scientist.
Totally.
Which is a compliment coming from me.
Yeah.
Because I can't even hang a picture on the wall.
So then the other thing that makes it a little more complicated, right, is I'm trying to start the Museum of Food and Drink because I was getting out of the art world. I went to grad school for art, fine art.
Yeah.
And so so I'm trying to get out, and Michael Batterberry, God rest his soul, hires me onto food arts, which was
You remember this magazine, Andrea? You're too young.
Yeah, to say it's a trade magazine,
Which
it's
magazine?
like
Food arts.
No.
It was the greatest.
we all read it.
It was wonderful.
Yeah.
It was.
Do you have any copies?
I do
I
not.
wonder if they're around.
So it was owned by Marvin Shankin, who has like
Cigar
Aficionado,
Wine
and,
Spectator.
Yeah, but it was a trade magazine, so you couldn't go to a newsstand and buy it. But
like
everyone,
a subscription.
It was
type
like
thing?
haute cuisine magazine for the United States, and it was really incredible when it came out. It was so artistic. And it's hard to conceptualize today because there's
what magazine would you?
There's
nothing.
There's
There's nothing
okay.
in comparison.
That's fair.
and it had real traction. And so so Michael Ariane Batterberry also started Food and Wine, which was bankrolled by Hugh Hefner. And then they sold that and they started this, which is, it's so weird because it's a trade magazine, but we all read it.
It would profile a chef in there, a restaurant. You'd see all these things. Again, we take it for granted because we have the internet today.
Right.
This is kind of pre-internet.
Yeah.
And it was food porn before there was food porn.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the way to describe
and
it.
so when Vitamix was, people forget Vitamix.
That whole ad campaign.
That whole ad campaign, the naked chefs with their Vitamixes. Because remember, Vitamix started out as a piece of equipment for health nuts. In fact, that's still a big chunk of their business. And they were like, why do chefs care about this? And then, someone there was smart enough and they did that chef
thing. They got
thing.
each chef, all the famous chefs of that era to pose completely naked, but their private parts covered by a Vitamix.
That's amazing. I love
and it was every episode of Food Arts you'd open up and you'd be like, who's
the chef?
And maybe it was Danielle Boulud or
Wiley did one.
Yeah, or Jean-Louis Paladin. I remember
these magazines have to be.
There's got to be. You know what? We need to find some copies on eBay.
And the back page was something called the Silver Spoon, where they would, it's kind of like a lifetime achievement for someone that had done stuff. So Michael Batterberry hires me to do history writing for it because I had done an exhibit on country ham. Yeah, so I did an exhibit on country ham when I was trying to start the Museum of Food and Drink because, not to toot my own beep beep, but no one was eating American ham the way that you would eat prosciutto sliced raw.
Yeah.
So I started that in 2004.
Yeah.
And so we were pushing that. We did a big exhibit. I got Kaminsky, this is right after he wrote Perfect Pig, to come. Jeffrey Steingarten back in the day, and we all got together, did a tasting, and this came to Michael Batterberry's attention, and he knew I wanted to start the museum, so he was having me write history pieces. And then he's like, "Oh wait, you know science too? You know Wiley?" And I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, so then I started becoming their equipment guy, their go-to equipment guy. Then he's the one who said, "You need to go work at the French Culinary Institute." Because they wanted to start because the whole Spanish invasion was happening, and
foam.
Yeah, foam, sous vide, all that stuff. And, Dorothy Hamilton wanted to get in on that at the French Culinary Institute back in the day. And so Michael's like, you got to hire this guy. Dorothy was like, we only hire, working chefs.
Had you worked in any restaurants at this point?
I mean, other than the local hamburger joint in Mount Kisco which, by the way, was a bad job.
Yeah.
It was a bad job. You know what I mean?
But you had not worked for a great French chef, or you had not worked.
Did it cross your mind? This is going to be my next step?
So
I was going to say that also. Now that I think, jog my brain, there was no such thing as bespoke cocktails back then.
No.
You would go. There was bars,
right?
And you could.
There's you get
some
the classics.
Things.
You get a martini. You could get a gin and tonic.
Did you create the whole cocktail culture of New York.
No,
you're not going to take credit for that.
No. So here, well, I'll tell you how it felt at the time, because a lot of people have written about this, but I'll tell you how it actually felt to be here at the time.
Yeah.
So, when I first started hanging out and doing stuff, getting circulators and whatnot for Wiley, pretty soon after he opened WD 50. Like whenever it opened, I was there. I met him pretty soon afterwards, mainly because he was macking on my sister-in-law. They're now married.
Yep.
And stayed married. So it's like a weird little community. But at the time, a lot of interesting bar work was being done in restaurants, right? Because they had culinary programs attached. So Eben Freeman at the time was doing cocktails at WD 50, and because Wiley wanted everyone in that business to be involved with, on the creative side, was pushing a lot of creative stuff in the cocktails. So I ended up having a lot of interaction with Eben.
Got it.
Right around that same time is when, there had already been, people were opening up. The beginnings of the cocktail renaissance here in New York had happened. So you had, Audrey was doing places. Milk and Honey had opened, Audrey Saunders. Milk and Honey, which is Sasa Petrosky, had opened up. And so, and these were places, there was a small cadre of these. This is even before PDT opened up, right?
What year are we talking around? Early 2000s?
This is early
right?
2000s, yeah. Early 2000s. And so I got to know not so much the cocktail renaissance people, but the people who, like Eben, who are more on the tech side, the people at WD. So when I get hired into, and there's a very small, very, very small group of people who are interested in cocktails, who are also interested in kind of new techniques. And the reason is because most of the people who are working on cocktails at the time at a very high level, like the Dale DeGroff, Audrey Saunders, Sasha Petrosky, that whole cadre, that whole generation of people, they were really scrambling to try to, in their mind, bring back something that was lost. Cocktail renaissance, meaning it needs to come back, right? Because it has been filth for so long. We need to bring back the quality, right? And so you have they're like discovering that Rittenhouse rye, which is cheap, at the time almost free, is delicious, and like that's what you should be making a Manhattan with, is with Rittenhouse rye.
Right.
So like in a way, even though I'm not going to say Sasha was a good business person, but he he had these really low pour costs with really good drinks, and his service and all. He was pushing a lot of that. There wasn't as many people who were interested in kind of my side of it, which isn't to say that that people were enemies, because I knew all those folks, right? So when I started working at the French Culinary a couple of years later, I always started folding cocktail things into my demonstrations. We would have people at the French Culinary come over and do cocktail events, especially at the Amphitheater where I was working, and I was always interfaced with them, and so I would always push techniques.
Science meets
right. So
technique.
I would train people early on. This is how you force carbonate. So I was, I don't know if I was the first, but yeah, force carbonation. I figured out all there were clarification things, but I figured out how to kind of work it in cocktails. Or, I was the person figuring out how to use centrifuges for cocktails. I was figuring out I learned how to use liquid nitrogen because I had to buy it for Spanish chefs who were coming over, right? And then then it became part of my toolkit. Distillation, all of these kind of techniques.
Did anybody teach you this, or you you just figured it out on your own? You're like, let me get the liquid nitrogen and just play with this? Right.
Well, at the time, I think we were saying earlier on air, it wasn't like the internet didn't have the information on it that it has now. That things were just starting like that.
Yeah.
But you kind of had to be a little bit of a self-starter with it. So yeah,
and a lot of experimentation.
That's right.
He's an innovator.
So that's what I'm good at, right? Yeah. But all the way up until the pandemic, when I started Booker and Dax the Bar in 2012 or something like this, I'd already been doing seminars at Tales of the Cocktail, which is kind of the industry bacchanalia, and I had been doing demos at the French Culinary Institute for years. I knew all the folks in the community, but I hadn't had a bar yet. So Booker and Dax, the point was these techniques aren't just for presentation gimmicks. They're not just you can use these in bar, right? I hadn't written Liquid Intelligence yet, but that was kind of a proof of that you could do this. And I opened that up in Sambar because Dave Chang was my partner, because we were supposed to be building equipment, right? Anyway. I don't even know where I was. I don't even remember where I was going with this. But it was seen as though there was this kind of enmity between, the old school cocktail people and the new one. But that is not at all the case. Like we all knew each other. We all respected and liked each other. But everyone kind of wanted to stay in their own lanes. And I think almost all the way up until the pandemic. So you would have, in culinary world, right? What I always thought was interesting is that on the press side, you'd have people saying, oh, the people who are using these new hydrocolloids and new ingredients and sous vide.
Right.
Meanwhile, all of the high-end restaurants, even the most traditional like Le Bernardin, Danielle, all of these techniques were in use at the kitchen. They just weren't flaunted.
Right.
So it's like you wouldn't necessarily know as a diner, unless you knew what the techniques were. Like if I sat down and ate it, I'd be like, I know what you did here, because that's my job. You know what I mean?
Yeah, this was sous vide and reverse seared and
this
all
was,
of that.
although I don't, reverse sear, I hate the term. I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Right.
For time immemorial recipes, sometimes you turn up the heat earlier and sometimes you turn up the heat later.
Right.
Before and after. There's no forward, there's no reverse. There ain't no good guys. There ain't no bad guys. It's just you and me.
Yeah.
We just disagree.
Yeah.
So it's like, another one I hate, dry brining. I call that salting.
Right.
Salt.
Yeah.
Again, another thing we've been
curing,
doing.
right.
Yeah. We've been doing this since infinity.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, whatever. I digress. You know what I lost? I lost sous vide. I never wanted to call the technique sous vide. So when I was working in it, when the New York City crackdown happened, and rest him, David Boulay gathered a bunch of people together and did a big event at his test kitchen to try to, with the health department to try to show them that we were all responsible actors. Yeah. What ended up happening is the health department then went and knocked on everyone's door who was at the Boulay event and, tried to give everyone a hard time. Anyway, so back to it. So all of the places we're using these kinds of techniques culinary-wise, they just wouldn't know it, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the pastry department, there was an amazing time for pastry. It was an amazing time. Pastry chefs were having a moment that they haven't had, I think, since, in terms of like the average educated diner in the early to mid 2000s could probably name 6 pastry chefs. Or 7.
John and I talk about this all the time.
Yeah.
Because we feel like there has been, and especially since COVID, this huge pastry chef loss. And now, when we're like talking about pastry chef guests, we're like, who should we have on?
Yeah.
It's tough.
But they benefited so much by the technology or,
The other thing is, I feel like bartenders in restaurants have always gotten a little bit of a short shrift because I don't think to really get into the nuts and bolts for people. I mean, I don't know whether people who aren't in the industry are like, I don't know who's listening who's not in the industry, but there's a huge kind of, bartenders are front of house people. They are in the tip pool unless they're a manager. And so there is a great divide between them and the cooks.
Yeah.
And because the cooks feel like the front of house people are getting overpaid because of all the tips that they get, they don't really want to give them a lot of limelight in the press. This is my opinion. Yeah. But I believe it's true.
I think it's true.
Yeah. And so a lot of the most interesting work in cocktails on the innovation side, because they could use culinary ingredients and culinary techniques, and they had this, because most bars don't have amazing kitchens behind them, right? They were doing a lot of the most interesting work. However, they weren't getting a lot of the press because the chefs were like, oh, hell no. If you're going to write about it, write about what I'm doing here. Right. And somehow no one ever was like, I'm just going to start no reporter was ever like, I'm just going to start pushing restaurant bartenders.
Right.
You know what I mean? Even if you look at when Xavier, who was doing cocktails for Lulu, like Lulu's name was on his cocktail book because that's just how the culture
the bigger
works.
machine behind it.
And I think nowadays the savory side chefs don't want to give as much light to the pastry as they did before.
I agree with that.
Is that absolutely true?
100%.
Which I think is unfortunate.
Yeah. Agreed.
It's so funny because anyone that goes to a restaurant for any reason is adding to the check.
Yeah.
Right? But it is also true that it's easier for people to wrap their head around a single personality. It's everyone's like, the era of the star X, Y, or Z is over. But the fact of the matter is, the average person, when they're going to choose what they're going to go to, there needs to be some brand they can wrap their head around.
Absolutely.
Whether it's the name of the restaurant in particular, whether it's the chef
yeah.
or whether it's the restaurateur.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
100%.
And because people and so, you know, if you're on our side of it and you're like, oh, I don't want to get put in a pigeonhole. Maybe not me. Well, sorry. That's just the way. Like that's the way business is.
Yeah.
You know, it's like kind of like, you know, when you're in a band in high school and college, and you're like, don't pigeonhole my music. It's like, okay, well, no one's going to listen to you because they don't.
They need to know the genre.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like.
Yeah. Speaking of, let's talk about your new project, Bar Contra. Because you're with two great chefs, Jeremiah Stone and Fabian von
Husky.
Which was like a full circle moment for you, right?
Two people that I love.
Yeah.
Now it's three people that I love in the same business. They had Contra Restaurant, very successful, amazing, Lower East Side. Orchard Street. And
but
now,
you were an intern.
He was my intern.
He was the intern.
So...
Yeah,
Fabian.
This is the Jedi Master.
I'm sorry.
Fabian, who I used to always call Fabulous, came to me, lied about his age because when I was at the French Culinary Institute, I wouldn't take interns who were under 21 because we did a lot of cocktail work. Even though we were culinary,
that's funny.
We did a lot of cocktail work. So I was like, hey, are you 21? He's like, yes. I didn't ask for their ID, whatever. They're students, you know what I mean? He was 18. And he came to be, he went through Savory. And then left, did a bunch of stages around the world, Noma, whatnot. I think Noma was before. Then maybe Noma was after. Came back and did a full pastry, and then I put him into Jean-Georges, to work at Jean-Georges. Yep. Jeremiah was not one of my interns. He was a relatively recent graduate. He got hired on to work at the Amphitheater, which doesn't sound like a good job, but like a lot of
at the FCI.
Yeah. So Leanne Wong, who, you know, is shooting again, like whatever they calling the new Top Chef Master.
Yeah.
She's on that, right? So she, had that successful in Hawaii until the unfortunate disaster. So yeah, she was the first person at the Amphitheater that I knew. Jeremy Tomczyk, who had been at Aquavit and now is, I think, at Pastis. So it's like, it wasn't like just some schmo in the Amphitheater, right? And Jeremiah was, the Amphitheater. And as kind of this weird swing tech person, I would do a lot of demos. So I had a lot of interaction. So I actually introduced those two.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. So like they're friends because I introduced them.
And that's how Contra started.
Yeah, so like, when, Jeremiah went and started doing a lot of work in Europe, and he worked for Omnivore Festival, worked for a lot of chefs, and, Fabian was doing or Fabiano. I still call him Fabulous. I'm the only guy left who calls him Fabulous. He, did stints at Noma, and they came back and they wanted to open a restaurant. I was kind of surprised. I was kind of surprised that Fabian he's like, yeah, I'm just going to do the pastry side. I'm going to do the sweet side. I'm like, really? That's so crazy. Because like, he's really good at like, all the stuff that he does.
Yeah.
So they opened that, and then they had it for 10 years, but I just think that, they were ready to kind of close that chapter. So when they did it, they closed it. They're like, we want to reopen it as a bar. And so they've, ding dong, I don't have a bar now. The pandemic kind of killed my bar. And then, existing conditions, the no longer existing conditions. And, so they're like, let's do it. So I'm like, great. So, the challenge, the interesting challenge here is that we were talking a little earlier about, how there used to be this kind of false divide between the tech people and the
traditionalists.
Yeah, traditionalists. Pandemic has erased that.
Yeah.
And, because a lot of the, the old school camp people are either they don't care about it anymore, they're out of the business, they're dead. Like one of those things, you know what I mean? And so the generation that's coming up is, I think, there's a time when everyone started with, it's like, oh my God, no one knows anything anymore because a lot of institutional, when I say institutional, like bar-wide industry, institutional knowledge was lost. You know what I mean? And so there was a while I was like, oh my God, are we ever going to get back to just the technical ability, the hospitality ability to where we were, back when this was a thing. And not only did that happen, but I think that people coming into it now are just like really they're good. They can use anything. There's no the camps have been erased, and so they can do
nothing's off limits anymore.
Nothing's off limits no matter what. So things that I would never do, like foams, because I'm not going to do that Ferran Adria foam garbage. Come on, man.
Right.
Yeah.
And the old traditionalists were like, I'm not going to use foam because that's like foamies. That's like some 1960s, 70s like trash can bartender like sour mix filth. I'm not going to use it. And now, like, young people are like, I don't care about any of your hang-ups.
Yeah.
You know, old folk. You know what I mean?
Just an open mind.
It's open mind.
And also just a lot more, there's just a deeper sense of understanding with the history of what's surpassed that, and nothing's off the table.
Right.
I mean, look, it's not all roses.
Yeah.
So, like, I think, like, one of the issues, and again, as old guy, you know, there's a lot of stuff that is gaining traction that I think is actually a bad idea because it shoots well.
Yeah.
And or it makes for good
social media
content.
What's on the menu? Like, tell us what's on the menu. What's on the bar menu? Like, is it?
That's an excellent question.
Like,
do you know yet?
No, that's the thing. People are like, okay, well, I'll tell you how I'm thinking about it. What's interesting. So I'm talking to Jeremiah and Fabian about it, and I'm like, and I said, you know, what's interesting is that if we were doing this before the pandemic, I could fundamentally just do the same shtick that I did before because no one else was doing it. Right. So like all I needed to do is bring all the stuff that everyone knows I do. But, you know, you have people now who like are doing all of these things and more. And so, I mean, there's not as much liquid nitrogen. So I'm still, I don't think I'm going to bring the red hot pokers back because I don't think we have the space for it.
What
for
was
the
red hot poker?
I built these flaming, these rods, these steel rods that would heat up to about 1650 Fahrenheit. And then you would shove them into the cocktail. And it sounds like bartenders love it, by the way. Every bartender I've ever trained, 2 exceptions, loved it. You know what I mean? And so they, you stick it in, the drink ignites, you get this amazing presentation, like a flaming drink, but, you know, in a relatively contained, safe way. And that was our way of making hot drinks because it was my take on the old, hot flip, like a loggerhead drink that you would have in a tavern in the U.S. back in the 1850s. And people went ballistic for it. It smells great because the super high heat creates these kind of burnt, not like in a bad way, burnt,
like a caramel
flavor that you can't get any other way. And certain liqueurs, like they get really interesting flavors when they're much more so than just like heating something on a stove, which, you know, I've done the side by side, so I'm not blowing sunshine. Like it's really different. You know what I mean? But I just don't know that there's enough space at Contra for
the red hot poker.
For the red hot pokers. We'll see. We have a whole nother season to figure out whether that's gonna. So I'm trying to figure out like what we're gonna do in this new world where you have people doing a lot of things. There's a lot of things out there. There's a lot of kind of, again, earlier in the episode, like I have semantic squabbles with things. Like I was saying, like I hated sous vide. I didn't tell you why. Yeah. Because it's not about the vacuum. It's about the temperature control. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Wasn't it used for like medical equipment? That's where.
Which the original? So the original circulators. So it's the circulator that's the important piece of equipment and not the vacuum machine.
Right.
Although I like vacuum machines. And they were science and medicine. Anytime you need accurate temperature control, and they used to be about $2,000 a piece. Every year I do a lecture with Harold McGee at Harvard for their Science of Cooking thing. And I've been doing it, I don't know, my 12 years now or something like this. And when I showed up, it was a couple of years ago, it was a milestone for me. And I told them, I don't know if they cared, if they gave a shit or not, but I was like, you are the first generation. I was like, I don't understand, because they were born right when I was starting to do this kind of work. And I said, I don't know what your intuition is, right? I don't know what you were born with. So like I had for decades been giving these like lectures on the intuition of cooking and how temperature versus heat works. This is the first, people who are coming of age now are the first generation to grow up in a world where low temperature cooking has always been a thing. Yep. And so I don't really know what their intuitions are. And so as a teacher, if you don't know what the intuitions of your students are, it's a problem. So I'm trying to figure it out. But anyway, so I lost that semantic battle, but we'll see whether so like the one I do now is like people like my partner from Existing Conditions, Don Lee, hates people misusing fat washing as a term. That's the one that drives him nuts. Yep. For me, it's milk clarification, or there's different reasons to do different things. Yeah. And we don't have the time because I would just go into a rant that only 3 people would care about.
So people are doing things to say that they're doing it versus doing it for the benefit of the cocktail?
Well, no, there is that. There's always that.
Right.
And I don't ever get mad at anyone if they can get press and get cash, as long as the drinks are good or the food is good. Right. I don't really care and they're not hurting people. I don't care. I don't care what you do to make money. If you're openly dishonest, as long as you're not hurting somebody else, I mean, is it okay to be openly dishonest?
No.
I don't think so.
No. I mean, about ingredients, no, because then you're ripping somebody off.
Sure. If even something as minimal, this sounds super silly, like organic chicken. I'm I don't know if I believe you.
Yeah. You know what I want to ask? If we go into the new Bar Contra.
When is it opening?
Will there be?
Who knows?
Okay.
I mean, when is this going? Yeah, probably,
this month?
They're in construction now. They're doing some renovation on the inside of it. Nothing that needs permitting, people. Yes, we do have paper up, but it's nothing that needs permitting, okay?
But we're guessing, let's call it spring 2024 it's open.
Yeah.
Okay.
We walk into Bar Contra. Will there be a Manhattan on the menu? What's your feeling about the traditional cocktail or gin and tonic?
So at Booker and Dax, which was my first place, we had a Manhattan and a martini, because we also had, I don't know if it was the first, but super early bottled cocktail program, right? And because I had very accurate temperature control. So we would...
What do you mean by that? Pre-made? What is bottled cocktail?
Yeah, so we would, we would, see if I don't remember it. It was it 1 bottle of Carpano, 3 bottles of Rit, I think, because Carpano is a liter. The Ritz were 750s, and you need it's a little less than 2 to 1 on the Carpano. And what was it? I don't remember. An ounce or so of Ango, and then we would put them all together. I think we would put a cherry in. I couldn't have cherries because I was allergic at the time. I took a bunch of shots, so I can have them now. And we would put them into 187 bottles,
So you were batching and then bottling them?
Yeah, well, adding the water, batching. Now, there were people at the time.
And the aging benefits that cocktail?
No. So there were people at the time who were doing aged cocktails. We never did that. So typically they would leave the headspace unpurged, or some people would even put it into barrels. Yeah. And, I never did it. So there were people who were aging the cocktails. A lot of that stuff was coming out of London at the time. And, that team hated the barrel team because they're like, why are you adding more wood to this, you oaf? And the barrel people were like, well, people like it and they like being pulled out of the barrel. Why are you being such a prude? Anyway, but I was never part of that. Because
I love that there's this whole subculture of cocktail geniuses. I didn't know there was I didn't know that. I didn't know it was an East Coast West Coast gang rivalry thing.
Yeah. Well, this one was across the ocean because the 2 hardcore bar cultures at that time were London and New York. Yeah. You know what I mean? Early. Anyway, so what we did was when we pre-diluted the cocktail, and then I poured liquid nitrogen into the top of the bottle to purge out all the oxygen. Because if you don't purge the oxygen, the vermouth will start to oxidize within hours. Yeah. And then we cap it. And then we would store them at exactly the service. The cherry wasn't in the bottle because I'll tell you why. So then we would store it at exactly the service temperature. You don't want a Manhattan actually too cold because the wood gets very nasty. It's in my book, actually. You can run the experiment for yourself if you don't believe me, but you should just believe me.
Yeah.
So we would
I believe you.
You should. So we would actually, if the freezer, we had a special freezer that kept a very accurate temperature, but if it went too cold, I could tell by the look of it, by the look of the liquor, I could tell, don't drink it yet. And so, but then we would liquid nitrogen chill the glass. We would serve you with the bottle with a cherry and a boom, and you would have it. We did the same thing with martini. So it was a very early bottled cocktail program. Yeah. I can't say if it's the first because also on the West Coast you had people like Jeffrey Morgenthaler in Portland and Jamie, at Clyde Commons and Jamie Boudreau at Cannon in Seattle. They were working on carbonation and bottling around the same time. Like that, they were the West Coast contingent. I was hanging out more with the London people. That's who I was like. But anyway,
that was your crew.
Yeah. So so that was our Manhattan. But gin and tonic was my forced carbonated gin and tonic. No one was forced carbonating stuff on the East Coast really at the time.
Making your own tonic. You make
Bach quinine.
Yep.
You know what I mean? I'd learned how to clarify. I'd spent years figuring out how to clarify lime juice day of with equipment that was reasonable for me to have at the bar. Yeah. Right. So that was what I had spent years and years and years trying to figure out. So yeah, it was simple syrup with quinine in it, quinine sulfate, which, I told them I worked at a school and bought, through a chemical supply house, and syrup, clarified lime juice, and I used Tanqueray at the time, and water. And then but they were very dry. Like I like a very dry gin and tonic, and so that was one of our flagship carbonated drinks. So that was our gin and tonic. So if you wanted, you couldn't come in and call a gin and tonic there. You know what I mean? Because we didn't have tonic water. And sometimes if it wasn't busy and I felt, however, I'd be like, do you have 10 minutes? Because I have the syrup, I have the quinine syrup, I have obviously clarified lime juice because we clarified that fresh every day. I have the gin you want, but I have to rock and roll chill it with liquid nitrogen. I have to get it down to temperature, and then I have to force carbonate it, which takes 5 minutes because I triple carb everything, and then, you know what I mean? So
here I am saying that we need 3 or 4 hours with him. We need 8 or 9 hours.
I have so many questions, but I feel like...
Can I tell you one last thing about it?
Yeah, of course, please.
Right, so
and I want to know why the cherry.
Oh, well, so the cherry looks great in the thing. So a lot of people, someone who I think, there's a lot of people I think doing very cool stuff now in the cocktail world, but on the West Coast, I'm especially enamored with Mike Capoferri at Thunderbolt LA. He owns more of my centrifuges than anyone, including me. He owns more Booker and Dax Spinzall centrifuges for clarification than I think anyone on earth. And he has a very interesting program. But anyway, back to, we could talk for hours just about the new people that are, doing, or in the tropical world, you have Garrett over at Sunken Harbor, Garrett Richard doing amazing stuff over there. You have there's so many people working now in this space that before I had difficulty getting people interested in.
Yeah.
That it's super gratifying, but I have to worry a little bit because, there are so many people working in it. You can't just rest on your laurels. But here's what I'm wondering in the new place. At Booker and Dax, all of our carbonated drinks were served in champagne flutes. Now, I'm not saying champagne flutes are the way to go, so don't get bent on me on that. But we would liquid nitrogen chill the champagne flute and pour the drink in because I didn't want any further dilution and I didn't want any further reduction in the bubbles. Side note, do you have 20 seconds for side note? So yeah. The higher alcohol content your product is, the harder it is to keep bubbles in it, right? Okay. So we were early on pushing carbonated drinks that were about 13% ABV, right? Which is a lot lower than a shaken drink or a stirred drink, but still relatively high. And so it was difficult to maintain the carbonation levels where they want. The more modern way that people are carbonating drinks, like Mike, so we never carbonated bottled drinks because they would we did later at existing conditions because they would you'd have to give people too much because carbonated, any bottle or can you put carbonated drinks in, you have to fill all the way. If you don't fill it all the way, you lose because you can't, unless you have a super pressurized system, which nobody does, you can't seal it and keep the carbonation, right?
Okay.
So the way everyone's been doing it to do taller fills into things and to make it easier to carbonate and to make it easier to chill the stuff is to drop the ABV. When you drop the ABV, then you need to have certain tricks to keep the body up. So certain sugars that don't have a lot of sweetness to them, because otherwise it tastes thin. So that's what the modern style carbonated, and those things kind of last okay on ice, right? But my style of drink, which I don't know where I'm going to land. I don't know where I'm going to land on ABV and carbonated drinks and drink size pour, right? But at existing conditions, we ended up pouring everything into Collins glasses on ice, carbonated, because it was deemed that people liked it better that way. But I'm thinking in my heart, maybe I want to go back, not in flutes, but maybe in AP glasses, serving the carbs without ice. And I'm torn because I'm just torn. And I'm also torn on what ABV level. If I'm going to go more modern and a lower ABV high pour on a carb, am I going to stay?
Do they all have to be the same? Can you do is it all in, or can you do some?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. So I do a lot of non-alc and low alc. So non-alc obviously is zero alcohol, right? So then you have to add bodying agents to those drinks to get them to taste. Well, there's two ways you could do it. You could make it preposterously sweet, which nobody wants. That's soda. They didn't want it. That's soda. It doesn't.
But a lot of them are made like that now.
Right, but like in my opinion, like a non-alcoholic drink at a bar shouldn't taste like soda.
Right.
It should taste like a cocktail, just not be alcoholic.
Sure.
And to do that, you really need to knock the sweetness down. Not necessarily the sugar content, but the sweetness. And so you can do that. It makes it hard for ideation if your numbers are all over the map, right? So it's easier like if you have like some low alcs, like a carbonated amari, which we're going to do a bunch of, I hope, and non-alcs. But I'm probably going to settle in at kind of 1 ABV range for regular cocktails. And so,
do you post that on the menu? Like, do you tell people?
We haven't. We could. I know the answer. I don't know. It's a lot of this is like
I have so many questions. I need to
Jeremiah and we don't always. It's funny. We don't always see eye to eye. So there's going to be every time you're in a partnership with somebody, it's interesting what the compromises are going to be, and I don't know. You know what I mean? And there's also the person who's our head bartender, Theo Uya, who started working for us at Existing Conditions right towards the end, and is now at Smalls, the jazz club. So it's going to be a conversation between the four of us about kind of where we want to hit, but we're probably going to choose a number that most of our carbonated drinks come in, and it will be somewhere between the modern kind of like 6% ABV, closer to beer, 6, 7, 8, and like 13 where I used to be. It's probably going to be somewhere in between those, and it's unclear.
What's the address of Bar Contra?
Well, that's a great question. It's on Orchard Street between Delancey and Rivington, but I don't know any addresses because I've lived in that neighborhood for 20 years.
You just know it by
I just know where to go.
I cannot wait to go check this out.
I'm so excited.
My head is like spinning with all of these details. I'm going to go in there though. Hopefully you're there the night I'm there, and I'm just going to say, Dave,
Make me
something great to drink.
Oh, great! And Fabian and Jeremiah also, like they're gonna be making some sort of like their take on bar food, cocktail bar food,
Love it.
Which is totally different from their natural wine bar, Wild Air, which is next door. And so they've asked, what do you think? I'm like, whatever you think is gonna be, it's gonna be good. You know what I mean?
Course.
So yeah.
Well, this has been amazing.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me.
So awesome. We got to have you back to talk more because we just there's so many things we touched on.
I feel like we just scratched the surface.
It was
with
so
this
great.
Conversation.
Dave Arnold, host of Cooking Issues, which is a great podcast anywhere you find your podcasts. Look him up. Several books that you've authored.
I only the one. It's on its 10-year anniversary. I'm supposed to have written my second book, but it took so long to write my second book that they're having me do the 10th anniversary of Liquid Intelligence. But
lots of articles and one book. Yeah. Dave Arnold, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ingredient Insiders. Follow us on Instagram at Ingredient Insiders. You can find the products we discussed on today's episode at chefswarehouse.com or at your favorite specialty retailer.